To introduce the vest in the sleeves, this pressure garment is made for scarring on the chest, abdomen, back, and/or upper limbs. The vest can be made with or without sleeves, depending on whether the upper limbs are involved. Variations include a zip or strip of Velcro. This is especially if it is a long-sleeved vest or the patient has limited range of motion in their upper limbs. This is added last after the garment is completed and is typically added where there isn't scarring on the patient, so either in the midline in the front, in the middle of the back, or one of the sides. You also can add breast cuffs. This is particularly for large-breasted women or if you want to get sufficient pressure between the breasts against the sternum. A neckband also can be added. This extends the vest upward and includes the neckband to form a polar neck if the neck is involved.
Okay, so now we'll be going over the measurements for the vest and the sleeves, and starting with the circumferential measurements. And before we start, you would obviously be doing these measurements on a patient that doesn't have clothes on, but just for the purposes of filming, we've got tight-fitting clothing on. So you'd refer to your upper body measuring sheet in order to record your circumferential measurements as you go. So to start, you would take your upper chest measurement. This is circumference A. And when you take this measurement, ensure that the patient's arms return to their side and that they're always looking directly forward. They mustn't look downward when you're taking this measurement, and take the measurement as accurately as possible. So that would be 86. Circumference B is then over their bust, 88, and take it over the largest circumferential measurement over their bust. Then circumference C is the under bust measurement, and you can request the patient to lift their breasts if needed. So that would be 77.5. Then circumference D is over their waist measurement. With this measurement, you take it over the navel and you can request the patient to not pull in their stomach. They need to relax, otherwise you're taking inaccurate measurements. So that would be 71.5. Then measurement circumference E is over the hip measurement, so it needs to be over the greater trochanter, which people often record too high. It needs to be over the widest parts of the hips, including the buttocks. So it is quite low, and you can see naturally on a top where the top ends. So that's circumference E, 99.4. And then circumference F is the upper arm measurement. So again, when you take this measurement, their arms must be at their side. Oh, sorry, there we go. Their arm must rest at their side. And this circumference measurement is, the tape measure must lie parallel to the floor, so completely horizontal. People often take a measurement that's diagonal, but it needs to be directly under the axilla, and that would be 29 centimeters. Then circumference G is over the olecranon, over the elbow, and that's 24 centimeters. And then circumference G is their wrist measurement, which needs to, the tape measure needs to lie over the head of the ulna, and that is 15.5. Okay, and those are all your circumferential measurements.
Okay, so this is the upper body measuring sheet, or Appendix B, that we'll be using to record all the circumferences and distances taken to make a vest with sleeve. Just to note that all circumferences are recorded in the circles and all distances will be recorded in the rectangles. So the first circumference taken was circumference A, which was 86 centimeters. Circumference B was 88 centimeters. Circumference C was 77.5 centimeters. Circumference D, 71.5 centimeters. And the last one, circumference E, was 99.4 centimeters. Okay, then the circumferences for the arm or sleeve. For circumference F, it was 29 centimeters. circumference G was 24 centimeters, and circumference H was 15.5 centimeters.
Alright, so now we'll be taking the distance measurements for the vest and the sleeves, and the distance measurements are represented by a square on your upper body measuring sheet. On Lindy, I've just marked where we've taken each of these circumferential measurements. So you can see that this is the upper chest, the bust, the under bust, waist and hip circumferences. And then for the arm, it's the upper arm, the elbow and the wrist circumferential measurements. And the distance measurements are measured in increments between these circumferences. Just a reminder to remind the patient to always look forward when you're taking the measurements, as to not distort the distances. So always look ahead. And then you can choose to either secure the tape measure at the suprasternal notch while you're taking all the measurements downwards, or you can take each increment that's represented on your upper body measuring sheet. I prefer to keep the tape measure secured so that I don't overlap and take inaccurate measurements between, so that my total measurement is also equal to the sum of each increment. But you do then need to calculate what is the distance between, and I'll show you now how I do that. And then also a reminder, especially on women, is to take the measurements in the midline, because the curvature of the breasts can distort the distance measurements. So just take that between. Okay, so we're going to start with the distance from the suprasternal notch to where you took circumference A, and that is 9.5. Okay, then keeping the tape measure still secured, I'm going to measure down. The total distance is now 19.5, but on my upper body measuring sheet, I'm just going to calculate the difference is 10 centimeters. Okay, then the total measurements up until circumference C that I took, which is your under bust measurement, is now 23.5 as the total length, but the distance between B and C is 4 centimeters. Then the measurements up until the waist measurement, which is circumference D, the total measurement is now 34.5. So that difference is now 11 centimeters, which you would mark on your sheet. And then the last measurement is all the way to your hip measurement, circumference E, which the total measurement is now 53 centimeters. So I'll mark that distance as 18.5 centimeters. Now we're going to take the sleeve measurements, and that's taken from the acromion to your first circumference that you took, and that is 12 centimeters. I then take the distance, I also keep the tape measure secured at the acromion, and I measure all the way until the elbow. So that's the total measurement is now 33 centimeters. So the difference is 11 centimeters, which I'd mark on my measuring sheet. And then the measurement all the way until the wrist is now 60 centimeters. So the difference is 27 centimeters that I'd mark between the elbow and wrist circumference. Okay, so the last three measurements that we're going to be taking for the vest are the 3 collar measurements. So that's represented as measurements I, J, and K on your measuring sheet. The first measurement that you're going to be taking is your horizontal collar measurement, and that's your tape measure needs to lie horizontal, so parallel to the floor, and the aid that you can use to help take this measurement is the vertical line that your neck naturally forms. So you can either visually extend that, or you can use a ruler to just assist you. So you just lie the ruler vertically, and it just lies flush against her neck, and that will help visually extend that vertical line. And then you just take your measurement I from the suprasternal notch to where it meets the ruler. And it needs to be quite an accurate measurement. So for her, it's 5 centimeters. I then am going to just mark where those two lines intersected for my next measurement. There we go. So your next measurement is now vertical, so it needs to be perpendicular to the measurement that you've just taken. Okay, and it's going to go upward to where it meets the base of the neck. Okay, so for her it is 8 centimeters. And again, I'm going to mark the end of that line to help with my next measurement. Okay, and that is measurement J. My next measurement is the last one, is measurement K. And that's taken over the top of the border of the shoulder, and you can see that that's where seams naturally lie for shirts. So I'm just going to measure that from the end of my previous measurement to her acromion, which you can palpate. And this measurement for her is 8 centimeters. It must not exceed 8 centimeters. So if on a man or a woman you measure measurement K to be 10, 11 centimeters, just cut it off, cap it at 8 centimeters, no matter who the patient is. It's just to ensure that the sleeve of the shirt is going to lie flush with their shoulder and isn't going to protrude.
Okay, now for the distances. The first one taken from the suprasternal notch to circumference A was 9.5 centimeters. The next distance from circumference A to B was 10 centimeters. The next distance from circumference B to C was 4 centimeters. Distance from circumference C to D was 11 centimeters. And the last one on the chest area was circumference D to E, which was 18.5 centimeters. Okay, and just to remind you that if there's a large discrepancy between the size of your two arms, you'll need to take the circumferences and distances separately for that arm. Okay, so the distance from the acromion to circumference F was 12 centimeters. Then your distance from circumference F to G was 21 centimeters. And your distance from circumference G to H was 27 centimeters. Okay, your distance I was 5.5 centimeters. Distance J was 8 centimeters. And then distance K was also 8 centimeters. Okay, we'll now be showing you how you will do your calculations for your circumferences. Just to note that all of your circumferences on the trunk area will be times by 0.2, and all circumferences for the sleeve or arm area will be times by 0.4. So to look at the first one, 86 times 0.2 will be 17.2. 88 times 0.2 will be 17.6. 77.5 times 0.2 is 15.5. 71.5 times 0.2 is 14.3. And the last one, 99.4 times 0.2 is 19.9. Okay. Then for your arm circumferences, 29 times 0.4 will be 11.6. 24 times 0.4 will be 9.6. And the last one, 15.5 times 0.4 will be 6.2.
So now we're going to be designing the vest using the upper body measuring sheets with our measurements and our calculations. You're going to start with a large piece of interfacing or paper, and starting from the upper left corner along the vertical edge, you're just going to first mark a dot along the edge about 10 centimeters down from the corner, and that is going to be your reference point, and that's where our suprasternal notch is marked. So that's our reference point, and we'll be coming back to that point a few times. From that reference point, you're going to make your first measurement perpendicular to that, to the vertical edge. You're going to draw a horizontal line, measurement I, which is that horizontal collar measurement, which is 5.5. From the end of that line, you're going to make a vertical line, also perpendicular, up for measurement J, which was 8 centimeters. From the end of that line, you're going to make your shoulder measurement, which is measurement K, no more than 8 centimeters. You're going to make that perpendicular outward. And that was 8 centimeters. And this forms your collar and shoulder measurements. And for this measurement, you're then going to draw the collar freehand. And I recommend that you make it quite wide. Don't just join those two dots. It ends up being a V-neck collar. So for this collar, I'm just going to create an arch in the corner there. Then returning to your reference points, you're now going to mark down your measurements along this vertical edge, which is going to become our fold. Along this vertical edge, you'll measure your distances down the trunk. So that's from the suprasternal notch down to the upper chest to bust, bust to underbust, underbust to waist, and waist to hips. So I'm just going to mark those each. The first one is 9.5. And I usually indicate, just to help me later when I'm measuring outward, I just indicate that this is upper chest. Then from upper chest to bust was 10 centimeters. And I just indicate bust. And then move downward 4 centimeters to underbust. Then underbust to waist was 11 centimeters. And then waist to hips was 18.5. Okay, and then you're going to be adding 2 centimeters to the end to add a hem. And I'm just going to indicate on the hem. All right. Then returning to your upper chest measurement, now you're going to make a horizontal line which is perpendicular to that vertical edge outward of your calculated measurement. And remember, this doesn't accommodate yet for a seam allowance. So you're going to first measure this outward and then add a centimeter of seam allowance. So I'm measuring 17.2. And then I'm going to add a centimeter, so that's 18.2 to indicate my seam. My bust measurement is 17.6. And add a centimeter, that would be 18.6. Then for my underbust measurement was 15.5. So then I'm going to make my seam measurement 16.5. My waist measurement was then 14.3. My seam allowance would be then 15.3. And lastly, my hip measurement was 19.9. So 20.9, and the same for the end of the hem. I just make it the same as my hip measurement. Okay, and then I'm going to now draw a continuous line joining the ends of the added seam allowance. I'm going to join the ends to follow the natural curve of the body, freehand. And that's okay if you need to go over it a few times. Right. Then you're going to join the end of the shoulder measurement to the upper arm measurement, including the seam allowance, you're just going to use a ruler to draw a straight line. And you'll also draw a straight line at the end of the hem. And that is your vest pattern. So like with the vest, I'm just going to indicate where my stretch would be. So again, it would be around the circumference of the arm. So it's a horizontal stretch like that. And the fold line is along the vertical edge for when I place it on my material. And then before I cut, I just want to double check that the joining line where the top of my sleeve would join with my vest, it would join from the end of that shoulder measurement to that upper arm measurement, and that would be the axilla. I'm just going to check that those measurements are exactly the same so that it makes sewing easy. And you can see that there is a discrepancy. There's a small discrepancy, and that's very common. And what you would need to do is, if it's a small discrepancy like this, about 1 centimeter, rather err on the side of having too large of measurements, and you can always take it in. You don't want it to pinch up into the axilla and make it very uncomfortable for the patients. So I would just mark here where the, for example, on this one, the measurement is greater on the vest pattern. So I would mark on the sleeve pattern where that should have been, and then I'll just taper that to the pattern. And it's a very small adjustment, but that's going to make for more comfortable fit and easier sewing. However, if the discrepancy is very large, say for example, my sleeve measurement was a very long measurement and the vest was very small, what I would then do is I would measure on the patient that around the glenohumeral joints, and I would halve that circumferential measurement, just to determine which measurement is more correct. Is the vest distance more correct, or is the sleeve distance more correct? So now we're going to cut out the sleeve, but just a reminder that we have now adjusted and corrected our sleeve measurement to join to our vest. So we're going to ignore this original line. So I just showed you an example, and I want to run through a few different scenarios that might occur with you. For the pattern that we just did, there was a very small difference between that distance for the joining line, and we want to make sure that the joining line is exactly the same, so that when we cut our fabric and we sew, that there's a nice even fit. So we saw that in my patterns that my sleeve was slightly smaller, it was about 1 centimeter less. And in that case, you just take a centimeter, you add 1 centimeter onto the sleeve, you take the largest measurement, you add and you adjust accordingly so that they match. But you might have other examples, especially when there's a very significant difference. So say, for example, in this case, my two patterns you can see are significantly different. The sleeve is much larger than the vest. And in this circumstance, what you do is you would first then double check which is the correct measurement. And that's the first thing to establish. Whenever there's a large discrepancy, you need to find out, is the vest measurement, is this distance correct, or is the sleeve measurement correct? Because you want to adjust to the correct measurements. And how you do that is by measuring the patient's glenohumeral joint, the circumference of that, and halving it. The half measurement will give you an indication of what it should be around. So say, for example, the circumference that I take of a person's glenohumeral joint is 40 centimeters, and half of that is 20. I then measure each of these distances. This is obviously a small model, But say, for example, the vest measurement was around 20. It was 20, or it was 21, or it was 19. It was very close to that correct measurement. I would then just stick with that. I'm just saying that's, for example, 19, but we find that this one, for example, is 27 centimeters, which is far too large. To correct the sleeve measurement, it's very similar to the example I gave on the actual patterns we just drew, but I would then just mark where it should be, and then I would just taper with a ruler and adjust accordingly. So when I cut my pattern, I would then exclude all of this area, and then my sleeve and my vest measurements and the joining line would be exactly the same. Another scenario is when you have a vest and a sleeve measurement, but perhaps the sleeve measurement in this case is correct. So again, similar scenario. You measure someone's glenohumeral joint, this discrepancy is too large, but we find that the circumference, for example, is 44 centimeters, so the half of that is 22, and we find that the sleeve is that measurement. But we find that the vest, for example, is a smaller measurement of about 18. All you do in that case is ensure the two tips are touching, align it, and then you just move this mark downward on the vest to match the sleeve measurement, because the sleeve measurement in this case is correct. So that is where you would then, when you cut your fabric and when you sew, that would be the axilla, not that. Okay. In a third example, you might have that. In this case, again, the vest measurement, again, maybe you measure someone's glenohumeral joints, and like in the first example, we had it be 40 centimeters, so half of that is 20 centimeters. And so we find that in the vest case, I'm going to make it around 20 centimeters, say it's 20.5 centimeters. We're going to just stick with that. But we see that the sleeve measurement, this distance, is 17, for example. So we know in this case the vest measurement is correct. It's closest to the correct answer. So we're just going to add on to the sleeve measurement. So then I would make a mark where it should be, so that it measures exactly the same. I would then join with a ruler and just extend that sleeve. And so when I cut, I would exclude this line, and I would cut and extend that so that those two match. In some cases, you might find, let's use this for example, this case for example, you might find that both are grossly incorrect. So say for example, you took the measurement and it was supposed to be, around 20 centimeters, and you found that this was maybe 15 and this was 27. So you can see it's a huge difference. What you would have to do in that case is you actually would need to measure and adjust both. So in this case, you would, if that was 27, you would then measure to 20 and you would make a mark, and then you would exclude that section. But then on this case, on this vest, you would then measure and mark where if this was 15, you'd measure downward and mark where 20 is, for example. And then you would make sure that those two do match. And so you would adjust both the sleeve and the vest because neither were closest to the correct answer. Okay, so now we're going to be cutting out the material for the pressure garment vest. I'm first going to start with pinning the pattern on. Just remember that you fold your material and you place the midline of the vest on the fold and you pin all the way around. going to then cut out the material on the border of the pattern. You can include the selvage as a hem, but for this garment I want to show how to hem up the bottom of this vest. And then we're going to create two pieces. The first piece I'm going to cut out the collar as the front piece of the vest, and then we're going to repeat this with excluding the collar. So I'm going to cut straight across, and that's going to be the back piece of the vest. So I'm now placing the pattern again on a fold, and we're now going to pin and cut out the back piece, and remembering not to include the collar. So I'm going to cut straight across. So now we have our back piece for our vest and front piece cut. Before I remove the pattern, I'm just going to mark where I need to start and end sewing. So I mark the axilla mark and also the collar mark, and I do the same for the front piece. I just need to make the axilla mark. Once I've done that, then I can open up my pieces, and I'm going to place the shiny sides touching each other so that the dull sides face outward. And I'm just going to make sure that all sides have those axilla marks. And now I can pin all the way around. And now I've pinned my garment. Okay, so now we're going to be cutting out the sleeve. So I'll start by placing the fold of the pattern, which is the longest edge, straight edge of the sleeve, on the fold of material, and I'll pin all the way around. Again, you can choose to use the selvage as a hem, but in this case I'm not going to. So once you have your two pieces of vest pinned together, you're going to start by sewing the tops of the shoulders on either side together, and then also from your axilla markings to the bottom of the vest, you're going to sew that closed all the way to the bottom. sewn the top of the shoulders and down either side, you're then going to pin a collar around and hem that closed just for a more comfortable fit of the patient. And similarly, you're going to hem up 1 centimeter at the bottom of the vest and pin and sew that closed. So once you've cut out your sleeve, you can open it up and fold up the bottom to form a 1 centimeter hem, and you're first going to sew that closed. It's important to do this first because once the sleeve is closed, you wouldn't have space on your sewing machine in order to do the hem later. Once your hem is sewn up, you can then go ahead and close the sleeve and pin and sew down the side of the sleeve from that point to the end. Alright, so now to join the sleeve to the vest, the most important part is you're first going to turn your sleeve inside out or shiny side out. And then you're going to feed the sleeve into the armhole of the vest, and you're going to match the pointy tip of the top of the sleeve to the top of the vest and the seam side of the sleeve to the seam side of the vest to the axilla here, and just pin that closed. So you should then have the sleeve pinned into the vest, and you're going to sew that closed. So for the vest and sleeve joining, if you have the option on your sewing machine, it's going to be best to use a stretch zigzag just for a more comfortable fit around the joint. So once you've joined your sleeve to your vest around the shoulder joint, you then can reach in and pull your sleeve inside out, and it should be joined. And this just allows the seam to be facing outward, and it will be smooth against the joint or against the patient. So I've just shown on this side how to finish off a sleeveless vest if you don't need a sleeve and the arm is not involved. So just the difference would be that your seam on the side from the axilla would be a little further down, about 3 to 4 centimeters compared to this side, which is up until the axilla point. On this side, I would just stop sewing about 3 to 4 centimeters below that, and then similarly I would hem over with the stretch zigzag stitch in order to ensure a comfortable fit around the joint.